I'm Nima Rajan. Canadian Border Service Agency workers are braced to begin some disruptive job action nationwide tomorrow. The Public Service Alliance of Canada and its Customs and Immigration Union say if a contract isn't reached by 6 a.m. tomorrow, its members will begin a sweeping series of actions at Canadian airports, land borders, commercial shipping ports, postal facilities, and headquarters locations. New Democrats say seniors are telling them that they have been cut off from monthly government payments. In a letter to 3 Liberal cabinet ministers obtained by the Canadian Press, New Democrat MP Daniel Blakey says many lower-income seniors who receive the monthly CERB payment are now ineligible for the Guaranteed Income Supplement for Seniors, or they are facing severe deductions to it. Employment and Social Development Canada spokesman Samuel Carbonneau says the supplement is income-tested and emergency benefits count as taxable earnings. A government working group on so-called open banking recommends that a regulated system for sharing personal financial data with third parties like robo-advisors and budgeting apps be put in place by 2023. The report says it's important to roll out a system quickly because technology is outstripping regulation in a rapidly changing financial services industry. The first flight of Afghan refugees who supported the Canadian military mission in Afghanistan has landed in Canada. It is the first of a number of flights that Ottawa is promising to get refugees out of Afghanistan as a resurgent Taliban retakes control of some districts. Many Afghans who contributed to Canada's mission in Afghanistan, including cooks, drivers, interpreters, and embassy staff, have become targets of the Taliban. New figures show the backlog of disability benefit claims at Veterans Affairs Canada remains high despite additional staff. The backlog currently sits at more than 43,000 applications. Canada War Amp's Executive Director, Brian Forbes, says the new figures underscore the need for real change in how such claims are handled. He and others have been calling for Veterans Affairs to automatically approve claims, particularly for veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder and other psychological trauma. Well, after decades of lobbying Ottawa, the Baffin Island community of Qikiqtarjuaq is going to get a $40 million deepwater port. Infrastructure Minister Catherine McKenna announced the project in Iqaluit.
We are announcing today that Transport Canada is contributing $40 million to improve the efficiency of Nunavut's offshore fishing industry through the construction of a new deepwater port in Qikiqtarjuaq on the main route of the Northwest Passage.
The new port will be located near the entrance to the Northwest Passage and would service supply ships as well as tourists and fishing vessels. Well, meanwhile, the federal government is taking its first steps to follow through on a promise made last month to help poorer countries get COVID-19 vaccinations. International Development Minister Karina Gold says 82,000 plus doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca shot will be sent to Trinidad and Tobago in the coming days. Olympic organizers are changing the start time of the women's soccer gold medal game between Canada and Sweden. A Canada soccer spokesperson confirms that the match will now be played Friday night. Both teams requested a time change due to concerns about the players' health and safety due to hot weather conditions. Andre DeGrasse's mother says she hasn't been able to calm down since her son won a gold medal in the men's 200 meters at the Tokyo Olympics. Beverly DeGrasse says the experience has been surreal.
I mean, I'm super proud and super excited. I feel like I'm on a high and I don't know how to come down. You know, even though like I was expecting it, it was just still like so surreal to really witness it, well, at least over the television.
It's the 5th career Olympic medal for the 26-year-old sprinter and the first gold. The gold rush continues with Damian Warner winning Canada's first gold medal in the decathlon today. Well, Walt Disney Animation Studios has announced the planned opening of a new studio in Vancouver. The company says the new studio will focus on long-form series as well as special projects created for the Disney Plus streaming platform. It says the Vancouver studio's work will begin with the musical series Moana. Outgoing Raptors star Kyle Lowry has penned a farewell message to Toronto, saying his bond with the city is unbreakable. The 35-year-old guard is Miami-bound as part of a sign-and-trade deal with the Heat that has yet to be formally announced. He thanked Canada and Toronto, saying the city will always be home. All right, stay with us. As Canada continues its efforts to resettle Afghan interpreters and their families, there is criticism around the process. We speak with Christian Leuprecht, professor at Royal Military College and Queen's University and senior fellow at the Macdonald Laurier Institute up next, followed by, of course, more news from around the world only on the Forum Daily. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after these short messages. Former Afghan interpreters now living in Canada and their allies rallied on Parliament Hill this Tuesday, calling on the federal government to bring their extended family members back to Canada. They argued that their previous work with Canada has left their parents and siblings back home at risk of Taliban reprisals. Ottawa has acknowledged the threat the Taliban poses to their families. Meanwhile, the first flight of refugees who supported the Canadian military mission in Afghanistan landed on Canadian soil on Wednesday. Joining us now to talk more on this is Mr. Christian Leuprecht, professor at Royal Military College and Queen's University and senior fellow at the Macdonald Laurier Institute. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Hello, thank you.
So let's start with a quick overview of the role that Afghan interpreters and other staff played during Canada's mission in Afghanistan and why they and their families are now considered to be at risk.
Yeah, so there's, of course, the instrumental piece of making sure that you can communicate, but there's also a cultural sensitivity piece so that they're able to bring to bear advice on how best to interact with local populations and local knowledge that otherwise would be lacking and would undermine mission success. The question is, under what circumstances people sign up for that particular mission? Was it simply for the payment that they received, or was there a broader expectation that they might, as a result of their assistance to Canadian Armed Forces, one day have the opportunity to come to Canada?
Now, meanwhile, veterans and former interpreters have criticized the resettlement process. What are some of their suggested improvements to this process?
Yeah, so look, I mean, we could have anticipated this at the time we went to Afghanistan. I mean, we knew that we were using interpreters and we knew that we're going to pull out one day and that the situation was likely going to get very dangerous again. And so we should have anticipated that we owed a debt to these individuals. And I think what we missed here is, on the one hand, clarifying the conditions under which they were working with us in the first place. And on the other hand, making sure that their expectations match what Canada is able to provide. And so I think this is a strategic failure on the part of both former and current governments not having had sufficient foresight. And we need to learn from this for future missions to make sure that this debacle doesn't happen again.
Now, I really want to dig deeper into the background of this conflict here. So this conflict in Afghanistan has been called Canada's longest war. So what was the original objective of this mission, and did Canada and coalition partners actually accomplish it?
Yeah, I think we lose track of that. The objective was to make sure that Afghanistan would not become a safe haven for terrorists to launch international attacks, in particular on the West. And that mission was accomplished within arguably a year of coalition forces showing up in Afghanistan. But then we got what's known as mission creep. We're starting to do all sorts of other things, starting to fight the Taliban, even though the Taliban did not pose a terrorist risk to internationally. We started to engage in also civil society and state building sort of exercises. We're using the military, even though it was probably not the most effective instrument to achieve some of these ends. And so now we're surprised when we're getting the outcome that was entirely predictable 18 years ago. And maybe we should have had more foresight and pulled down the mission once we had a sense that the original aim of the mission had been accomplished.
So we're seeing, as you're saying, coalition forces are withdrawing from Afghanistan. The Taliban is making significant gains on the ground. You're saying this is unpredictable. Why is that, Mr. Leuprecht? Or this is predictable, rather?
Yeah, because if you understand your history, and I think if in the West we had a bit more humility about our ability to bring change and to understand the conflicts that have beset societies in Afghanistan for centuries, then I think we would have had a more realistic outlook on what the prospects actually are and what an appropriate role for Canada might be. And that the Taliban would always consider us invaders, occupiers, and that the Taliban would always have greater resilience and greater endurance than Western forces. And of course, that's what the Taliban banked on. And the Taliban that calculation seems to be working out for the Taliban and not for the West.
All right, so just about a minute left, but what does the future of Afghanistan look like after Western forces withdraw from the country?
So I do think there's a lot of change that Canada and coalition forces have affected. And so it is not going to go back to the status quo ante. I think Afghan society will push back hard against sort of some of the extremely conservative efforts by the Taliban. And so I do think we see a considerable effort at modernization. But I think this will be a struggle, but a struggle that ultimately the Afghan peoples will need to work out for themselves rather than having Western countries work it out for them.
All right, Mr. Leuprecht, always great having you on Forum Daily. Thank you again for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, stay tuned. We've got more top national headlines coming up after the break. As wildfires continue in BC, the Yukon begins lifting public health measures, and Alberta's top doctor apologizes over confusing communication around public health measures. These stories and more news from around the world coming up shortly after the break, so stay tuned. We'll be right back on the Forum Daily, everyone. Wildfires in BC continue to scorch a path through the province's interior. A wildfire burning in the West Wold Monty Lake area is now threatening 271 properties, forcing residents to flee their homes. Earlier statistics from Emergency Management BC showed that there were 64 evacuation orders across the province, with almost 4,300 properties affected. Meanwhile, residents of roughly 21,000 other properties have been told to be ready to leave on short notice. The Yukon government is lifting a series of public health restrictions. Starting today, the territory says masks are no longer required in indoor spaces, but are strongly recommended when it's difficult to maintain physical distancing. Also being dropped is self-isolation after domestic travel. Dr. Brendan Hanley, Chief Medical Officer of Health, says such restrictions are no longer defensible measures for such a highly vaccinated population. Alberta's top doctor is apologizing for causing confusion, fear, or anger after communicating the province's plan to eliminate all remaining COVID-19 public health measures. In a column sent to media outlets yesterday, Dr. Dina Hinshaw says her words have caused some people to think she believes COVID is over, which she insists was not her intended message. She says lifting requirements for isolation, asymptomatic testing, and contact tracing will allow the province to focus on other health threats, such as opioid deaths and syphilis. Well, meanwhile, Rocky View County is the latest Alberta municipality to declare an agricultural disaster due to severe drought. It joins Wheatland County and 16 others in southern Alberta. Dan Hen, the Reeve of Rocky View, says meat and other food prices are probably going to increase for consumers because of low yields and high feed prices. Canada's major railways are now predicting an 8.6% drop in the volume of grain being shipped this year. Saskatchewan farmers enrolled in the Agri-Stability Program this year will now receive a 75% interim benefit payment, which is up from the former 50%. Agriculture Minister David Merritt says the change approved by the province and the federal government can help producers with cash flow needs and provide them with additional flexibility to deal with dry conditions. Federal Agriculture Minister Marie-Claude Bebeau says Ottawa is working closely with provinces to get farm families the support they need to deal with the drought. Concern about West Nile virus has prompted the Manitoba government to start spraying for mosquitoes in Winnipeg and the rural municipality of West St. Paul. The province says this is due to high numbers of the adult Sciolex tarsalis mosquitoes and evidence of West Nile virus infection. It says hot, dry weather was creating ideal conditions for the West Nile carrying mosquitoes, and August is historically a high-risk period for human infection. Ontario is opening temporary road test centres to address a testing backlog that built up during lockdowns. Centres will open in Guelph and Oshawa on Monday, while others will open in Toronto, Hamilton Niagara, Mississauga Brampton, and York Durham in September. The province says the centres will help more new drivers get their G2 and G licenses. According to the Ministry of Transportation, there is currently a backlog of approximately 700,000 road tests. The Court of Appeal for Ontario has dismissed an appeal from the Ontario government after a directive making some post-secondary student fees optional was ruled to be unlawful. A lower court had struck down the government's student choice initiative, which would have allowed post-secondary students to opt out of paying for services deemed non-essential. The court said that if the government wants the policy enacted, it must amend the Ontario Colleges of Applied Arts and Technology Act and the legislation that establishes each Ontario university. Quebec says the 585,000 doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine received this week will be the last shipment distributed to regional health authorities. Next week's final scheduled shipment will be held in reserve. Quebec currently has more than 2 million unused doses of COVID-19 vaccine, which officials say is enough to cover all those who have not yet received 2 shots. Nova Scotia's Liberals broke out the calculator and tallied up the cost of their 2021 campaign commitments. Overall, $454.7 million has been penciled in for the next 4 years. Party leader Ian Rankin says $93.2 million of that is earmarked for the first year of a new mandate. Ottawa has announced the arrival of a new boat to respond to whale entanglements and strandings in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence. The new vessel, based out of Shippagan, New Brunswick, will be operated by the Association of Professional Acadian Crab Fishermen. In addition to the cost of the $379,000 vessel, DFO also provided the association with an additional $30,000 for whale disentanglement equipment and other operational costs. All right, stay tuned. We'll have stories from around the world up next as the White House's eviction moratorium faces legality questions. Meanwhile, the Mexican government sues U.S. gun manufacturers, and a forest fire in Greece threatens the birthplace of the Olympics. We'll have these stories and more news from around the world coming up next after these short messages, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. U.S. President Joe Biden may have averted a flood of evictions and solved a growing political problem when his administration reinstated a temporary ban on evictions. But the move may not stand up in court. A Supreme Court justice warned the administration in June not to act further without explicit congressional approval. But the White House says this eviction ban is different from the last one. At the very least, as Mr. Biden himself has said, the new moratorium will buy some time to protect the estimated 3.6 million Americans who could face eviction. The Mexican government is suing U.S. firearms manufacturers and distributors, arguing that their commercial practices have unleashed tremendous bloodshed in Mexico. The unusual lawsuit was filed in U.S. federal court in Boston. The Mexican government argues that the companies know that their practices contribute to the trafficking of guns to Mexico and facilitate it. Mexico wants compensation for the havoc the guns have wrought in its country. The sale of firearms is severely restricted in Mexico, but thousands of guns are smuggled into Mexico by the country's powerful drug cartels. A major forest fire in Greece is threatening the archaeological site at the birthplace of the modern Olympics. A government minister said firefighters waged an all-night battle to protect the archaeological site from the fire in the southern Peloponnese region. The site is where the Olympics were held every 4 years from 776 BC for more than a millennium. A heat wave that authorities have described as Greece's worst since 1987 has baked the country for more than a week. Microsoft says employees must be fully vaccinated to enter the company's U.S. offices and other work sites starting this month, or rather next month. The tech giant has told employees it will require proof of vaccination for all employees, vendors, and any guests entering Microsoft buildings in the U.S. The company also says it will have a process to accommodate employees who have a medical condition or other protected reason, such as religion, which prevent them from getting vaccinated. The company is also delaying its return to the office until October 4th. Importers are contending with a perfect storm of supply trouble, rising prices, overwhelmed ports, and a shortage of ships, trains, and trucks. And it's all expected to last until 2022. The experience is disturbing enough that many importers are reconsidering cost-saving decisions they made in recent years to shift the production out of the United States to China and other low-cost producers. Pakistani police say a Muslim mob stormed a Hindu temple in a remote town in eastern Punjab province, damaging statues and burning down the temple's main door. The attack on Wednesday followed an alleged desecration of a madrasa or religious school by a Hindu boy earlier this week. A police official says the mob apparently incited that a local court had granted bail to the 8-year-old Hindu boy in the alleged madrasa desecration. The head of the U.S. Agency for International Development is expressing concern about the dehumanizing rhetoric used by Ethiopia's leaders. This comes amid the 9-month conflict in the Tigray region, whose forces last month were described as weeds and cancer by the country's prime minister. Samantha Power said 10% of targeted aid has reached the region since mid-July. Australia's government has pledged $813 million to address Indigenous disadvantage, including compensation to thousands of mixed-race children who were taken from their families. The $279.7 million being used to compensate the so-called stolen generations is the most expensive component of the package, aimed at boosting Indigenous living standards in Australia. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said the compensation is a recognition of the harm caused by forced removal of children from families. British police have made 11 arrests in connection with the online racial abuse of England soccer players following their team's loss to Italy in the final of the European Championship last month. 3 players endured a barrage of abuse after they missed penalties in England's shootout defeat. The UK Football Policing Unit says it has requested data from social media companies to advance its investigation and has passed on information to local police forces that can help. The arrests were for a number of offenses, including malicious communications. Some of the summer hires on the Mediterranean party island of Ibiza are different this year. They include private detectives posing as tourists who tip off the police about illegal parties that break COVID-19 rules. Hundreds of thousands of tourists have headed on to the island in recent months as travel restrictions ease. A Black Canadian physician says she hopes a new one-of-a-kind Barbie doll made in her image helps change the narrative of what a doctor looks like. Dr. Chika Stacy Oriowa, who is also a spoken word poet and advocate, is one of 6 women serving as inspiration for Mattel's limited collection of Barbies, honoring health workers on the front lines of the COVID-19 crisis. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website or follow us on social media. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.